Hi, I'm here to talk about our time system. That system that has 24 hours in a day. That system that has 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute. That system that decides that at 12 we switch over to 1 in the afternoon. That system that decides that at midnight we switch the calendar date from one day to another. This is a system that regulates our lives. And whether you're going to go to bed at a specific hour, wake up at a specific hour, go to work, it all falls under this system. And I never really thought about the system until I went to Africa. So here is a cool lesson from Africa to us. So here is my story. I got to work in Ethiopia. I worked with a partner firm, with partner colleagues, and was based in Addis Ababa. On one particular morning, I had a friend come and pick me up and take me to work. And while we're busy talking in the car, from the corner of my eye, I noticed that the clock on his dashboard was wrong. It was showing 3:15. And on my watch, it was 9:15. Now, that's not a particularly serious issue. I mean, there's a lot of clocks that we have around us that we don't normally go and change. I don't change my microwave clock, and I don't even know how to change my oven clock. But in this specific case, I knew exactly how to change his dashboard clock. So I leaned over to start changing it and say to him at the same time, I see your time is wrong, let me correct it. What happened at that moment was quite startling. To have him driving, looking over at what I was about to do, and say to me, "No, wait, stop, don't do that." And you really do have this moment, this sort of second of looking up at him and saying, well, what's wrong? He then looked at me, laughed, and said, "Oh, you don't know about the Ethiopian time system." So let me tell you about the Ethiopian time system. That 0 hour for us that happens at midnight, that moment where the calendar switches from one day to the next. In Ethiopia, that 0 hour happens at sunrise. So in essence, they set their zero time at sunrise. For us, Europeans working in Ethiopia, that sunrise time in Ethiopia is 6 a.m. So in our specific case scenario that happened in the car, where I was seeing it was 9:15, from 6 a.m. to 9:15 is 3 hours and 15 minutes later, which is what was showing on his clock on the dashboard. In essence, their time system is really more of a stopwatch, timing the amount of hours that the sun goes through the sky during daylight. Quite simple. Now, there are some questions you immediately start to ask, and I can imagine what a lot of you are already saying, that, well, this can only work in Ethiopia because they're by the equator. Well, that's not entirely true, and I just need to be a little bit more accurate about this. The most southern part of Ethiopia is 3 degrees above the equator, and Ethiopia is actually quite a big country. So there is a bit of a change between summer and winter as to the exact time that sun rises. But as it turns out, there is this twilight moment where the sun is still behind the horizon before it's actually risen, where it's daylight. And the same thing happens after sunset. The sun has set behind the horizon and it's still daylight. And their 12-hour system actually works beautifully within that zone, meaning that they've set what would be more of an arbitrary time that is 0 and the twilight zone. And again, it'll reach 12 in the twilight zone. But they have set a fixed time that says this is 0 hour. And from that point of view, it pretty much works well throughout the year. The next sort of questions that you start to ask, or issues that come to your mind, will be, well, New Year's Eve must be kind of interesting. I guess you all get together at 5:59 in the morning to do that 10-second countdown to the new year. To which the Ethiopians kind of respond to, no, we don't do that. Anyway, I now started asking a lot more questions, and the bigger questions I had was quite simply, where does our time system come from? I mean, this system actually is kind of cool. It kind of makes logical sense. How did ours come about? And that prompted me to research our time system. So now let me tell you about our time system from what I've been able to research. For starters, the 24-hour clock that we have. It kind of comes from Egypt. It comes from ancient Egypt. What the Egyptians did is they used a sundial to monitor the sun time during the course of the day. And on that sundial, they decided to split the dial into 12 periods. Now, why did they decide 12 specifically? I'm not quite sure. It could have actually had something to do with the fact that the amount of sunlight would change between summer and winter, and therefore they might have had a buffer of maybe 20%. But nonetheless, it is 12 periods. What's interesting is that their nighttime was based on the rotation of the Earth, having stars come from the horizon over the night sky. And they would pick out specific stars, that once a star peered out, that star would start signifying a certain period. And then a next star would come out, and that would signify the next period. In fact, somebody in that time era who quite knew their different stars would be able to look up at the night sky and pick out the specific stars and be able to say, oh, such and such a star is up, such and such a star is up, such and such a star is up, therefore we've got period 1, period 2, we're in period 4 of the nighttime. That's just an example. And they divided the nighttime into 10 periods. So you had nighttime, 10 periods, daytime, 12 periods. And we adopted from the Egyptians those periods into our hours. And I find it's a bit unfortunate that we decided to adopt the 12 periods of the day, and that's what we stuck to and multiplied it by 2 for 12 periods of night, and we didn't choose to adopt the 10 periods of the nighttime. Because if we had adopted 10 periods, we could have been on our way to metricating the time system. But that's just me. The minutes, 60 minutes in an hour and 60 seconds in a minute, that has also got an intriguing story behind it. It comes from, apparently, from what I've seen, the ancient Babylonians. The ancient Babylonians appear to have worked out that there were 360 days in a year. Now we know that's not quite right, but how they worked it out was quite simple. They would look at, for example, a river that would flood on an annual basis, and they would literally count the days between the flood. It probably worked out to an average of 360 days, and that's what they decided to stick to, 360. And this is actually quite a common thing in South America. The natives also worked out that there were about 360 days in a year. And the reason why they needed to work this out was they would count the amount of days before they would plant the next crop, and that way regulate their society. We adopted those 360 days. As you can well imagine, there are 360 degrees in a circle, 360 degrees of longitude on the Earth. So our 360 comes from the Babylonians. The 60 in 60 minutes and 60 seconds turns out to be a function of 360, and that draws down to why we have 60 in a minute and 60 in an hour. Now, in some ways it's a bit unfortunate, because what the Babylonians were doing was counting really the time period of the Earth revolving around the Sun, and that's not actually very consistent. It is 365 and that quarter that we've been able to work out. Whereas the revolution of the Earth about its own axis, now that is a very consistent period. And now that comes back to our time system. If we were trying to figure out what astronomical event happens on a very consistent basis that we can actually regulate our lives to, it is the rotation of the Earth about its own axis. And how do we detect that? Well, for the Ethiopians, they can do it from sunrise to sunset. But for the rest of us, the majority of people in the world who live quite a distance away from the equator, that, as you know, won't quite work out, because the sunrise and sunset will change, that time will change quite dramatically between summer and winter. But what we do have that is incredibly regular is that moment of sun peak. It doesn't matter if it's in winter or summer. The angle between the horizon and the sun, that may change, but the time at which it peaks and then starts coming down again, that moment, if you set your stopwatch to that moment, 24 hours later, it will happen again. 24 hours later, it will happen again. That moment is consistent. So much so that if you've got two cities on the same longitude, they may see that moment angle, that peak, to be different between them. The actual angle may be different, but the time that it occurs will always be the same. And if you look at our time system, well, we kind of start timing. Our stopwatch starts after the peak, from 12 in the afternoon onwards. So much so that at 1 p.m. it's 1 hour past midday. 2 p.m., 2 hours past midday. So our stopwatch is at the peak. And of course at midnight we reset it to after midnight, being the AM hours. Many of you will know that in many parts of the world there is a sort of a movement to implement the 24-hour clock. And we all know what the 24-hour clock is. 1400 hours is 2 p.m., 1500 hours is 3 p.m., and so on and so. And I think there's something slightly unfortunate about that, because the 0 hour happens at midnight, and that's how we start timing it. There have actually been a few attempts, at least proposals, of metricating our time system, to changing it into, well, tens and hundreds and etc. I don't know if that will ever work, but nonetheless, at this moment, I have to say to Ethiopia, thank you. Thank you, Ethiopia, because you held on to your culture and held on to your time system, and it is so significantly different from the rest of ours. Granted, it meshes in. I mean, your time system does work in conjunction with ours, but the mere fact that you held on to it, it at least prompts us to think about our time system and not just take everything we have for granted. Well, that's it for this video. I'd like to say thank you very much for watching it. If you liked it, please press that button. Apparently the YouTube algorithm likes that. If you had to share this video with others, we'd really appreciate it, as we're trying to get this channel off the ground. The basic theme of this channel is about science, economics and history, and how it affects us every day. We've got a list of topics already set up for the year. We're going to be releasing the videos every Monday. Next Monday's video is going to be about the watch and language. It's an interesting topic. Nonetheless, if you did enjoy it, we really appreciate your help. If you could let the adverts at the end of this video run, that would really help fund our future videos. And again, I say thank you very much.